Welcome, mere mortalites, to another round of the Mere Mortals Meanderings for an episode I have titled Podcasting 2.0 and Value for Value, Delivering on the Promise of Bitcoin. My name is Kyron, host of the Mere Mortals podcast. Typically, I have my friend Juan with me to explore different ideas, different topics, and we'll kind of go all over the place. I'm doing the opposite today. I'm focusing on a couple of really core things which I've been spending probably the last 2 to 3 years of my life really investigating deeply and trying to understand better. So today is Monday, the 19th of June, 2023. And I'll just say at the start here, you're probably going to hear me using a lot of abbreviations. So instead of podcasting 2.0, I might say P 2.0. Instead of value for value, I will definitely be saying V for V. And instead of Bitcoin, you might hear me saying BTC or Sats, or short for Satoshis, which are a portion of Bitcoin, much like a cent is a portion of a dollar. So what are we going to be finding in today's episode? Well, I'm going to be going over 4 properties, which I feel each of these separate things have within them and why it's interesting to kind of compare and contrast between these. We're going to be going over the history and the current state and also the future of podcasting. We'll be talking about a new model of monetization for digital creators and so much more than monetization, and also how all of these have combined with the promise of BTC, of Bitcoin, and have had a real impact on my life. And let's just start off with the definition of Bitcoin, because I think it does help to get into meanings and definitions and why these things are useful. So going to the Bitcoin white paper, we see from the abstract, Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. A purely peer-to-peer version of electronic cash would allow online payments to be sent directly from one party to another without going through a financial institution. And that is what I truly believe is happening with this value for value model mixed with podcasting 2.0. We are seeing how people are able to transact directly from listener to the podcast creator in a manner without financial institutions, directly peer-to-peer, sending value through this network. Incredible, awesome. So we'll be getting on to podcasting 2.0 and value for value a little bit later. I want to talk about the properties, which I was hinting at before, and I suppose the definition and meaning of these, because a lot of things get squirrely if you don't have at least some sort of basic form right at the start. So there are 4 properties, which I believe that podcasting 2.0, value for value, and Bitcoin all have together. These being decentralization, self-sovereignty, permissionless, and enabling of value transfer. So let's get into a couple of the definitions of these. Typically with decentralization, it's usually talking about an organization which is doing planning and decision making, and then you can, going from Wikipedia here, it can be distributed or delegated away from a central authoritative location or group and given to smaller factions within it. What I think this is really talking about here is that you can have something which is decentralized, has the property, it's a property of a system where the agents are able to operate locally. They're able to make their own decisions and do their own things. For self-sovereignty, this is talking about having exclusive control over something that I have a moral right to. Now, typically when you hear of self-sovereignty, you'll be usually talking about someone's body, i.e. the decision, the right to make and do what they want with their body, whether this be as small as something like getting your ear pierced to something more, I suppose, radical or more serious, has more serious implications, such as getting an abortion, or tattooing or scarring your body, or vaccinations, things like that. In this case, we're going to be talking more about ideas and speech rather than the body or identity. Another one, which is self-sovereign identity, an approach to digital identity that gives individuals control over the information they use to prove who they are to website services and applications across the web. This is obviously very important today nowadays with a lot of data hacking, of breaches, of people losing confidential information via not having a secure identity. So in this case, self-sovereignty, we're going to be focusing more on the ability for me to have the exclusive control over my ideas and speech and not have this influenced or controlled by other entities. For permissionless, this is a pretty easy one. Does not require someone else's consent or authority or authorization to do. So I don't have to ask someone to take an action to do something that I want to do. And in the case of Bitcoin, we'll see this in terms of sending payments. For value, we'll see this in terms of being able to send that value to someone and doing it in a manner, in a amount that I want to. And for podcasting, we can see how this will be for more about the spreading of those ideas and not requiring or asking someone, oh, please, can I send this idea? Can I say this thing? The final one is value transfer. And this is being able to move something valuable to another geographic location, to another person, or to another entity, or this being a group or something like that. So let's dive into, I suppose, the original version of podcasting to start us off with, and how these four factors are really found within it. So number one, for decentralization, though there is one source of truth, this being the RSS feed, this can be found on multiple directories, i.e. a compilation of podcasts. This can be curated or not curated, and can be accessed by many podcatchers, which today you would now call podcasting apps. And these being typical ones you'll hear of are Apple, Spotify, YouTube, maybe, and some of the other smaller, but yet still have sizable people listening to it, which are more independent, I guess you would say, would be something like Podcast Addict or Pocket Cast. And then there's a whole suite of new apps, which I'll be talking about shortly. So we can definitely see how the original version of podcasting was decentralized. Though there was one thing, I could control it. And this is getting into the self-sovereignty, the one source of truth, the RSS feed. I could host my own feed, or I could choose to use a podcasting host. And these are typical ones you'll hear of, Buzzsprout or Castopod, for example, and another more self-sovereign one, Blueberry, RSS.com, the list of them goes on and on. So we have, this decentralized way to access a single source of truth, which I own, or which I have at least the ability to own. And it's permissionless. All I need is a microphone and perhaps a laptop, or not even that, maybe just a microphone and internet access. And I can say whatever I want. I can swear. I can talk about taboo topics. I can do it in whatever style of speech I want, with conversations with other people or via myself talking into a microphone. So we can see how, okay, it's very much permissionless. The original version of podcasting, you could do whatever you wanted, and within the limits of the law of whatever country you're in. The final one here, value transfer. Well, what do podcasts do? Well, typically they're a spreading of ideas, of information, and I would even say unfiltered individual truth. So I could speak into a microphone and say whatever I wanted, and this doesn't necessarily have to be correct in terms of objective facts, but it would allow me to express a lot of subjective individual opinions for sure, and objective facts as well if I was so inclined. And we could just see how this is useful for countries which have authoritarian regimes, and being able to get information out of those countries to know, okay, what actually was going on in Iran and Iraq, and what is the person on the ground in Kentucky or the average person in Britain thinking, feeling, what are all of their ideas and whatnot. So we can really see, okay, this is what the original version of podcasting had, and how these four properties were very much satisfied within this, and why it exploded as a medium and became very, very popular. So getting onto, I suppose, the current trends of podcasting, and knowing just a little bit more about what's happening, what is the current state of it? Is this still true? Do these properties still hold in today's day and age of podcasting as we know it? Once again, a definition might be helpful. So I'm going on to podnews.net here, which is owned by James Cridland. And he was just talking about, what is a podcast? And there's the technical answer, which most podcasters would agree that technically a podcast has 5 elements: an audio file in MP3 or AAC format, without DRM, which is digital rights management, I believe, available to download distributed via an RSS feed using an enclosure tag. You can also have video podcasts, but they are called video podcasts. Now, this is the more technical one. He goes in this article that he's written to talk about how the definition has somewhat slid over the years, and other people would consider, something that is on Spotify or YouTube or Apple, even though it's not distributed via RSS, you could still kind of call it a podcast. Even though it's not on demand, it's kind of like a radio show. If you're subscribing to it, an Apple Podcast is that one. I'm not going to get too deep into the definitions and talking about is this or is this not a podcast, but I will talk about what we're actually seeing with a lot of these platforms and how they're doing things which are kind of screwing around with those fundamental properties that we saw earlier. So a couple of trends that we're seeing in the podcasting industry over the last couple of years. Let's get on to the first one, which was decentralization. So this is being able to, have individual agents locally acting upon something. And what we saw was that Apple participated in the deplatforming of content on their app, which is totally fine, but they also had an index, which a lot of other apps and some of those ones that I was mentioning just before also linked to find out where is the source of truth. So they weren't going directly to my RSS feed. They were kind of using Apple as the main source of truth. This is where all the podcasts in the world are, even though this is obviously not the case, because what we saw was there were certain types of things that Apple did or did not allow on their platform. That's fine. That's their right as an individual company to choose what they do or don't have there. But we do have a problem when that company is also filtering the content, deciding what others are going to show and find available in your app. So if I, for example, was a fan of Alex Jones, one day I was able to access his podcast called InfoWars, and then the next day I wasn't. This happened pretty regularly in conjunction with a lot of kind of deplatforming of other social apps, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, that sort of deal. And I suppose the main problem is that Apple kind of broke their Swiss-like neutrality, and that obviously it wasn't actually decentralized. We weren't able, for me as an individual person, to access what I wanted to access. And so this is where we can kind of see, okay, well, this is maybe the first step of things being not truly decentralized. If everything is going through Apple, well, and all of these other apps are accessing the Apple index to find out where are all the podcasts, if they start to say, no, this isn't on here, well, we can say, okay, maybe it's not as decentralized as we once thought it was. Let's go on to the second factor here, which was self-sovereignty. Do you have exclusive access over your content and what it is that you're producing? Well, let's have a look at YouTube, for example. I can find podcasts on YouTube. Yes, you can in a sense, but do you own? You do have access to the rights to that. Do you actually own it? Well, if you go onto the YouTube terms of service, which I have up to here, you can kind of see, no, not really. So there's a section here talking about the license to YouTube. So by providing content to the service, you grant to YouTube a worldwide, non-exclusive, royalty-free, sub-licensable, and transferable license to use that content, including to reproduce, distribute, prepare derivative works, display, and perform it. So basically, YouTube can do whatever they want with it. They've got another section here talking about the right to monetize, saying how they have the right to put ads, to do whatever they want with your content, and you don't actually have the right to any money from that necessarily. Now, of course, they do pay out. They do have a platform which does allow creators to monetize and get a portion of that, but they get to decide essentially what it is. The most important portion of this is actually the removing of content. And so if we go onto here, removal of content by YouTube. If we reasonably believe that any of your content is in breach of this agreement or may cause harm to YouTube, our users, or third parties, we reserve the right to remove or take down that content in our discretion. So once again, we're kind of seeing, is this really self-sovereign? Do you really have the right, the ability to own and access exclusively your thoughts, what you're saying, your ideas, and your speech? No, not really. YouTube has a pretty big portion of this, a strong hold on what you can and can't say. Have they been tyrannical in their deciding of what is and isn't allowed? It depends on who you ask. Sure, you're allowed to kind of criticize YouTube if you want to, and there are many videos on YouTube doing that. But then there's also a lot of stuff which they've said, no, we feel this is not. This is causing harm to YouTube, our users, or third parties, so we're going to take this away, which is very much different from the self-sovereignty of being able to host your own hardware and have your own software, your own feed, RSS feed contained within that, where you can own the full stack. You have control over, your house, the hardware within your house, the software that is in that, and the content that is getting distributed out to the world. So once again, we can kind of say, well, if YouTube is hosting podcasts, it's not really satisfying the self-sovereignty aspect of what I was talking about. Let's go on to the third one, which was permissionless. Anyone can access it. The definition of permissionless, again, does not require someone else's consent or authorization. And let's have a little look at Spotify. Well, what has Spotify been doing over this last couple of years? What they've been doing is hosting a lot of feeds through their subsidiary service called Anchor. And if you are an Anchor user, what you will actually find is you don't necessarily have an RSS feed. You actually don't have this kind of permissionless aspect for people to access your content wherever they want. No, there is a gatekeeper. The gatekeeper is now Spotify, because they haven't allowed this RSS to go out to the broader ecosystem. So people can't find your content on Apple, on YouTube, or on any of these smaller apps, Pocket Casts, for example, because there's no RSS feed. They own it. They are the gatekeeper. So it's not permissionless. And we can really see this, how they've done this with Joe Rogan. So got his content, and now he agreed to that. So once again, if you're agreeing to this, that's totally fine. And as a company, they have the right to try and create exclusive shows and do whatever they want. That's totally fine. Is it a podcast? Yeah, once again, you're kind of seeing that, no, it's not really becoming permissionless. Now it's becoming, no, you have to access this content through one exclusive service, this being Spotify. And it's not just Spotify doing this. You can see YouTube trying to do similar things. Apple is also trying to do similar things with their subscription service. There's very much this aspect of these kind of walled gardens coming in. Podcasting was this open ecosystem. It was this beautiful place where you could find content wherever you want. If you didn't like this particular app, if you couldn't find it there, well, you can go over to this other one and you'll find it there. And what we're actually seeing is there's starting to be this kind of closing off, this sectioning off. You can only find Joe Rogan on Spotify. You can only find this thing on YouTube. And I think this is kind of antithetical to what podcasting is and should be. It is open, it is free for everyone, and it's now developing this kind of closed version, or at least that's the trend that we've been seeing over the last couple of years. And then finally, on the value transfer aspect, this is where I'm going to talk a little bit about advertising. And what is the, I suppose, main way that you will hear of podcasters monetizing their content? It's through advertising. It's through getting sponsors coming onto their show, and they will do a host read ad of, I love this sort of thing, blah, blah, blah. I use it every day. Or they might even have the more nastier ones, which are dynamic ad insertions. These are just random ads placed in the middle of your content, once again, with your permission, but as the podcast host. But we're looking at this kind of value transfer. Is this actually improving, making the shows better? I would probably say For 99% of advertising, no. You're getting a random thing, not directed towards you, perhaps not applicable to anything that you care about. And we can see some really funny instances of this happening on, I think it was like a children's show, and a wild turkey bourbon ad would appear in the middle of it. Or it would be, typically gets into political things, and I'm not going to dive into that area, but we can definitely see, okay, with especially dynamic ad insertions, it's not actually making a better show. The value transfer is not really becoming better. Arguable, I'll let that one slide if people want to argue with me over that one. So we can kind of see, okay, there's some problems developing, and it's podcasting is changing away from this open system to a closed one, or at least we saw some trends of this happening. So what are we going to do? We're going to fix it. So this is where podcasting 2.0 comes in. And podcasting 2.0 is a community of developers, of hosts, of podcasters and listeners who all have one goal, and that is to improve podcasting. Now, the funny thing about podcasting is it's kind of been in a lag, or a very stolted swamp for a fair while. There was no innovations. Nothing particularly new was happening for close to 15 years, from when it was first created in that 2003, 2004 era of time, towards Apple getting into it. And this is where the pod comes from, because it came from the iPod, or that was where the audio files were first being really easily accessible by people who were non-nerds and just normal everyday folks. And they had an app on their phone. They were like, whoa, look at all this content. Amazing. And it was kind of just stagnating a bit. For example, why couldn't you just have a picture appear on your screen if you're talking about something? You see this all the time with podcasters. We'll hear it all the time. They'll be talking about a graph. They'll be talking about a funny photo. They'll be talking about something and trying to describe it to their listeners. This is great. This is what audio is for. But man, wouldn't it just be awesome just to have the ability to have that photo appear on the screen? Why wouldn't that be doable? That's not podcasting. You can't, we can't have the innovations like that. It's too hard. It's too difficult. We'd need this person to coordinate with this person, and this group to this group. And this is actually where you can kind of see the decentralized nature of it actually was a problem, because you would need the podcast hosts to agree with Apple, to agree with the podcast apps that, we're all going to support this change to the format of podcasting, of the RSS feed. And it was very hard to coordinate all those sorts of things. So podcasting 2.0 was started by Adam Curry, who was, incidentally enough, the guy who helped to create podcasting, the very original version. So he was a former DJ, MTVJ. So he was very much in the music/video realm, interested in digital content creation. That's kind of been his main shtick for forever. And he helped and focus and drive the development of the medium of podcasting. He was the one who was suggesting with Dave Weiner, the creator, I guess, the programmer who invented RSS, and saying, that wouldn't be great if we could put audio files into RSS and make that part of the standard. And then he helped develop it through a show called The Daily Source Code, which would go on to help develop the medium of allowing app developers to play with different tags to enable apps to access this audio and to create all of these new things. He's very much doing that at the moment with a show, funnily enough, called Podcasting 2.0, where himself and another person called Dave Jones, who is a sysadmin, many, many years experience of open source and database work. And the two of them have combined to help create a new standard and to enable some of these features, one of which I mentioned before, such as an image appearing in your app. Why can't we have all this new innovation, these new things going on? Well, it was kind of this chicken and the egg scenario. And so Adam just decided, we're going to be the chicken and we're going to lay some eggs. And these eggs are the new value, the innovation that is occurring in podcasting. So this is really getting into the heart of Podcasting 2.0, the future of podcasting. What is entailed within this? Well, there's a couple of different things which I'll try to explain here. The first of this is the podcast index. This was their very first step. And this was getting the kind of decentralization back into podcasting. So they created their own index, which by their own words here, the podcast index is here to preserve, protect, and extend the open, independent podcasting ecosystem. We do this by enabling developers to have access to an open, categorized index that will always be available for free for any use. So beautiful. We have this index, which now solves that problem of Apple kicking off shows and not allowing certain content. The index, they also have some measures for, it's not technically ingesting every single thing, which is an audio file in an RSS feed. They do have a couple of limits in place, such as it needs to have more than one episode. It needs to be more than a certain amount of time. It needs to be someone not just going test, test, test into a microphone because they're trying out a podcast for the first time on something like Anchor, which typically draws in a lot of kind of trashy people just testing it out for the first time. Nothing of actual real value there. Now to kind of foster the creativity, so they started the index, and now, awesome, we've got a beautiful point where developers can have another source of truth. Where are all the podcasts? Where can we find these different things? And they also developed a namespace, which was to foster creativity and open input. So a namespace is essentially just saying, here's a group of rules, of definitions, of standards as to what you can do with an RSS feed. And this basically means, what are some rules that if I put in some images or if I put in some extra links or some text, that other podcasting apps who are developing new stuff and new innovative ideas can look at, and there'll be just a formal language. I suppose you can basically imagine it as, like with my abbreviations right at the start, it's a way of saying, okay, P 2.0, that means podcasting 2.0. V for V, that means value for value. And just having a set of definitions of standards so that people looking at an RSS feed can say, okay, I know what to do with this. I know how I can show this in my app and create some cool new features, which gets us onto the tags, AKA the features. So podcasting 2.0 was started, I believe, in 2020. And so this was, roughly 3 years ago. What have they done since then? Well, there have been 25 formalized tags. So once again, these are features in roughly 2.5 years since they started formalizing them. And so what are some of these cool new features? Well, one is the lit tag, the live item tag, which means that as a podcaster, I can choose to go live. And there's a way now for podcasting apps to see, oh, Kyron's live. We can show this in our app and have a live experience, much like you will see on YouTube or live broadcasts. There is a demand, a thirst for this. People actually enjoy listening to things live because it is in the moment, it happens right then. We also have something like the chapters. And so this is being able to see timestamps. So if I wanted to, and I do, I always put in chapters into my podcast. So if you're not interested in a certain section, you can have a brief glimpse, a summary, and go, oh, midway through, that looks like an interesting point. Click on that, and you get taken to right there. With this, you can also have an image associated with that chapter. So you will be hearing me talk about some graphs later on, and I will be directing you to, hey, go to an app where you can actually see this image because it will help you understand what I'm talking about. You can also have a link in that section. Another common thing you'll hear podcasters saying links in the show notes. When you have 5 different links, where do you put them? How does someone know which one to go to? Whereas if you're saying that and you actually have the link appearing on the screen or associated with a chapter, it's much more easy to go, oh, okay. As a listener, beautiful. I know what's going on here. I know how I can ingest this. I know how I can do something with this action. So it's not just kind of a pointless throwaway thing. We also have something like the transcript tag, great for accessibility. So if you are hard of hearing and you want to see the words appearing on your screen as you're listening to your podcast, you can do this now. This is doable. And this was just one of those things where it's such an obvious, blindingly easy thing, but for 15 years it wasn't done. What are we doing? So it's really amazing to have that. It's also great for search. So if someone was coming to the Mere Mortals and I was talking about an old episode, or I was talking about a particular thing in an episode, they could go, okay, Adam Curry. Karen mentioned him. Where was that in the episode? I want to replay that to my friend. They can click on the transcript, type in Adam Curry, bam, it'll show up instantly. So once again, it's just an easy feature, which is so useful to have. It is something that's been cried out for ages, and nothing was done about it. The final one, which is, not the final one, another example is the value tag, which I will be getting onto sooner, which was talking about how we can now have the ability in the RSS, in the podcast, me as the podcast host, to direct people to help, to how they can help support me directly, financially, monetarily within their actual app, without having to jump through the 5 different hoops of go to this website, activate PayPal on this, or try and send this to here, go to this subscription service and subscribe here, go to this paywall and choose one of the options there, and then you'll be able to get access. It's just so much easier, so much better, and we'll be getting onto the value tag shortly. What else have they helped to sponsor? Well, now there are more than 40 different apps which support the namespace, i.e. they support at least one of these different tags. And there are several podcasting apps which have gone the full gamut and are basically almost on top of every single change. And so you can see that there are apps which, whilst they might not have the name branding of an Apple or a Spotify, I believe they actually have features which are much, much better, and which allow you as the listener to have a better listening experience, to actually dive into it, or as the podcaster to provide more value to your listeners so you can put in extra effort. Otherwise, you're kind of just creating audio, and sure, you can shorten it up, you can chop it up, you can get different guests on and whatnot, but you're very restricted in terms of having those extra features which can help your audience. If you are, say, a financial podcast and looking at graphs at all the time, or you are a podcast which wants to acknowledge the different guests and hosts that you have on, you can now do that with the person tag. So there's lots of really cool things going on. And basically, it's allowing for connectivity between podcasters and their listeners, a more easy access between the two of them, so that the podcaster and the listener aren't in this kind of black box, which you can find yourself in, where you're creating things and you're not sure if anyone's listening, or you're responding to things as the listener and you're not sure that message is getting through to the podcast host. Very, very common problem in podcasting. Let's get on to value for value and my explanation of this, which is it's really simple but complex in the nuances. So I've actually done a full new podcast called Value for Value. If you type that into your podcast app, you'll find that. And there's 2 seasons, roughly about 36 episodes, which go into the nuances. But right here, I would just say it's basically a trade of value to form a circular economy is basically what it is. So I create value, i.e. this digital content, this audio or video, because I also put this on YouTube. And I just ask, hey, here it is, free upfront. You can ingest it as much as you want. Welcome. Enjoy it as much as you want. All I ask is that you return some value back to me. Now, value is very subjective and it can be varied. Adam Curry, once again, coming in, who was the, I suppose, pioneer of this value for value model, i.e. a model which is suited primarily for digital content creators. And he likes to say the 3 T's of time, talent, and treasure. So you have time. You could share this episode with a friend. You could spend the time to explain some of the concepts in here. You can do many things which don't require a real active effort on your part to do something, to really, really go out of your way and either spend money or anything like that. There is talent. So if I say something wrong, if I have got the history wrong, if I put in a wrong note, if you are an audio engineer and you hear, oh, Karen could improve the podcast by putting more sound panels, I definitely could, then you can help provide that talent back. And you can see for No Agenda, Adam Curry's main show, that they have a full website, they have a store, they have people helping out in a myriad of different ways because his show is rather large and people like to help out. And so we can see, okay, there are people who are very talented in something which I'm not talented. Let's just talk about creating artwork, for example. And if I had an audience member who didn't want to support in a monetary form, they could support me by sending in artwork and helping to provide value that way. Amazing. Then finally, of course, treasure, that is supporting monetarily. We all have to acknowledge this is a world where fiat dominates, where the needs of reality very much dominate us. And so we do need to eat, we do need to sleep somewhere, we do need to have access to services. And all of this requires money. So money is very much an important part of this, the treasure part. And so being able to get direct contributions from your audience, because maybe they're time poor, maybe they don't have a talent which is really suited for your show, but maybe they're rich and so they can just help support your show. Or maybe they are also, time poor, maybe they're not even rich, but they still want to contribute in some way. This is what the value for value model emphasizes. If you get value from this, I just ask that you return it. And that value is completely subjective. You can choose how much or how little that you want to give back. Now, all of this is roughly opposed to, I suppose, advertising, to sponsorship, to paywalls, or VC, venture capital funding. But it's not necessarily exclusive against this, i.e., if you want to run advertising in your podcast, you can still do that and also do the value for value model at the same time. A great example of this is Chris Fisher with many of his Jupiter broadcasting shows, these being things like Linux Unplugged, of Bitcoin Dad, of Linux Action News, of Coder Radio. All of these shows, or almost all of them, he has a sponsor, but he also does value for value at the same time. It 100% can work together. What works most effectively is actually typically when you go all in for value, because you can emphasize the benefits of having an exclusive show which doesn't have, and when I say exclusive, I mean a show which relies solely upon listener support, and you don't have any undue influences from advertisers or sponsors. And this is where you'll see things like the recent FTX collapse, where many people had sponsors of FTX on their show. And even if they had any misgivings about the service, of course, they're not going to say anything about it because they're receiving money from it. If we go on to valueforvalue.info, which is a great website for learning more about the value for value model, in the section labeled monetization model, we can kind of see how it flips the script as compared to those things I just mentioned. Putting a paywall in front of your content like Patreon does, of having a subscription where you can only access the content if you pay a certain amount per month, like you can find in Apple subscriptions, of having advertising on your show where, yes, you're unlikely to say bad things about this sponsor, or the dynamically inserted ads, which are just by and large awful, jumping into the middle of a show. Just imagine a TV show, but without the cliffhanger at the end. Before the ad, it just jumps straight into something. A lot of it's truly awful. Anyway, going on to the value for value. So this is value, the number 4, and then value.info. We can see here we're trying to get at what's the difference between a payment made through value for value and one which is made through perhaps any of these other mediums. And so we go, let's get one thing out of the way. Monetizing non-scarce information is difficult. The default monetization model of the online world is advertisement, a model that relies heavily on surveillance and gameable analytics. V4V offers an alternative. Selling information outright doesn't work. Selling bits and bytes on a per item basis is nonsensical, since bits and bytes are non-scarce. They can be replicated ad infinitum. So this is why we see it's really related to digital content and not something like producing a mouse or a water bottle or something like that. No, this is a non-scarce resource. Anyone can access it for the marginal cost of whatever, I don't know, a couple of watts or volts of electricity is. The V for V model flips monetization on its head. It leads with abundance. Information is set free. No artificial barriers or restrictions are added to the content, whether it is audio, video, text, or something else. The value is given away freely, and those who find the information valuable are asked to give back. The main difference between a conventional transaction and a V for V transaction is that a V for V transaction is voluntary, unlimited, and direct. V for V allows value and information to flow freely without restrictions and without middlemen. It is a different approach to monetizing bits and bytes online, as well as a different approach to creating content and value. People will give whatever it is worth to them. Some might give the equivalent of $1, some will give 50, and some will give 500 or more. So we can really see here, okay, the value for value model is really, it's really about, it's a kind of a mindset. It's almost a lifestyle. You do have to be a lot more comfortable with not having agreements in place between you and a sponsor, or having more certainty of how much revenue you're going to be making per month with, and I've got this many people subscribing to this level of support. Okay, I can roughly know this. No, it's much more based on how you provide value, how your listeners receive that, and then also in the asking of value and giving it back and forth. So we do have this kind of model. Okay, how does this link up with what I was talking before in related to those 4 properties: decentralization, self-sovereignty, permissionless, and value transfer? Well, it does. So we see decentralization. I can talk about this for myself. We are supported via multiple people who find us via multiple apps and are supported in multiple ways. It is not strictly monetarily. We have people who have contributed some really great things. For example, a piece of software which I use to help create my app, the chapter markers. It was something I couldn't do myself. I had a listener, Peter, who very much sent in. In particular, it wasn't super complicated software. It was an Excel sheet, but it had some things in it, some formatting, which I didn't know how to do. He managed to do that amazingly. So we can see that, I guess, the content is the source of truth in this case. So it's decentralized into how people respond, how people give value back. But the source of truth is always going to be me and how I ask for that. How do I ask for it? Self-sovereignty. I control the ask. I can say, hey, I really want you to support me via this method. And that method could be by attending a live event that perhaps I'm creating up. It could be via one of the payment mechanisms I really enjoy. It could be by sending in particular, pieces of content or digital or photos or things for an art contest, which I want to display. It could be by referring me on to certain guests. Hey, I'm looking for a guest of this type. Does anyone in my audience know this? So I control the ask. I really get to decide what I ask for. And then you as the listener, you get to decide what value you want to provide back. There are plenty of things which you could perhaps know, which I don't know. And you can say, okay, here's some value in this format. Or if we're talking about the monetary terms, I'm going to give $5,000. I really enjoy it. I'm a billionaire. I really enjoyed this, what I was listening to here. I've enjoyed this show for a fair while. That's nothing to them. And that could mean the whole world to me. So we can really see, okay, there's very much this self-sovereignty aspect, both for myself and then also for the listener at home. Permissionless. There is no gatekeepers between me and my audience. Now, this is a more difficult one to explain because it involves censorship, and there's sort of soft and hard forms of this. The soft form is more what I was describing before. This is where I have a sponsor or someone who I'm trying to keep happy, and they can kind of be like, well, this news that came out about us recently, we don't really want you to talk about that. It doesn't show us in a favorable light. I'd prefer you not talk about that. As me as the podcaster, and especially if I'm receiving money from them, the obvious answer is yes. Okay, I won't talk about that. We can also have these more hard forms, which is, I suppose this is where it's getting to, don't say about us. It can have stipulations in a contract saying, no, we're not going to allow you to talk about this certain topic. If you talk about it, contract gets terminated. And another soft form is kind of me feeling, they're probably not going to want me to talk about it. I'll maybe just watch my words in this case. I maybe just, I might not just say this. So we can really see this with the kind of gatekeepers. They are the ones who, there's no gatekeepers. There's no middlemen between me. Like I was saying in here, V4V allows value and information to flow freely without restrictions and without middlemen. So this kind of aspect of middlemen is a tricky one, and I'll be talking a lot more about this in the value tag when I get onto that. The last aspect here, value transfer. So how does the V4V model, have this property? Well, it's called value for value, and it's pretty self-explanatory, but it recognizes the importance of subjective value. So this is really getting to the heart of, okay, value is not just money. Money is great and all, it's very useful, but there's a lot of things, in fact, mostly everything in the world, which if you're really on your deathbed, you're looking at your life, money is not the thing that you go, that was the most valuable thing. No, it was interactions with friends. It was leading an ethical or moral life. It was deciding to do certain things or not to do certain things. It was traveling. It was, making love to a beautiful woman or a beautiful man. It was deciding, it's all these factors which are just so much more important than money. And the great thing about the value for value model is it recognizes this. You can go, okay, beautiful. There's things which are more important than money. And I suppose if we want to get onto it, if we're going to look at it in the monetization model, yes, it is very much important. It is helpful to have money. So you can do it through this model, and you can do it through the cheapest, quickest, most efficient, and best money we have today, which is Bitcoin. And so this is kind of getting onto the Bitcoin properties as well. How does Bitcoin relate to these four aspects? And this is really where I started off. This was actually my starting point when I was coming up with these four ideas. And then I just saw, okay, yeah, these actually relate to podcasting 2.0 and value for value. So decentralization, well, there's one source of truth, this being the ledger. And this is supported by a network of nodes and miners. And so once again, it's people. One of the things I think that decentralization is hard to envision is that there is always a kind of one source of truth in aspect, which is this is the one thing which everyone kind of agrees upon, whether this be in an open source project about, let's just take podcasting 2.0, the namespace. The namespace is the kind of one source of truth, and this has a GitHub attached to it. Now, with Bitcoin, for example, the strong thing is being me as a pleb, as someone who just has no idea about how I would be able to access the Australian financial system without a bank. And in this case, I can actually go see the Bitcoin network. I can go see the code, and I can go check and verify every transaction that has ever been done. There is this ledger which has everything on there. If I was trying to do that in a monetary form here in Australia, for example, I wouldn't be able to see. I have no idea how much Australian dollars there are in circulation, or how much there is on the kind of like balance of the government or in the Reserve Bank of Australia. No, I kind of get a little feel for it by going through one of the banks that we have here, Commonwealth Bank, Suncorp, ING, NAB, whatever you choose. But once again, I'm very much restricted in this. So Bitcoin is definitely decentralized. Self-sovereign. I'm entirely responsible for my coins unless I choose a custodial service. So once again, it has this aspect of being able to do everything yourself. But if you choose to offload some of that responsibility to another party, which you can trust, or which I hope you trust, and you get to make that choice. You at least have the choice to be self-sovereign. In this case, you would have a wallet of some sort, which you controlled and created via your phone, via your laptop, via something that is known as a hardware wallet. And you can own kind of the coins or the access to these coins yourself. All you need to do is remember 12 words, and listo. You're ready. You're completely sovereign over as little or as much wealth as you are comfortable in doing in that sense. So once again, you kind of own the money, and you have a lot more knowledge about the properties of this money, i.e. in Bitcoin's case, there's only going to be 21 million of it. It's only going to inflate at this certain rate, where you can see year on year, it's actually the inflation is deflationary. Let's get into permissionless. The ease of access means that no central entity can stop me or getting or using coins however I see fit. So in the case of getting coins, we can see, okay, well, I can earn them, much like I'm doing through my podcast right now. I can mine them through a miner. I can buy them from a centralized exchange. I can get them from a decentralized exchange. I can get them from a family member who wants to send it to me. I can get it by working for it. There's a whole myriad of options of getting access to these coins. And once again, all you need is a wallet of some sort and internet access. What about using the coins? Well, no, in this case, I can do whatever I want with them. I can send them to my friend. I can send them overseas. I don't need to go through a bank to be able to do this. I can just create a transaction myself and send it off. And you have a lot more functionality of what you can do with it. It is truly permissionless. There is no one who can really restrict what I do with it without, pointing a gun at my head and saying, do this, otherwise bad things will happen to you. So we can see, okay, in this case, Bitcoin definitely is permissionless. Value transfer, this is the classic thing related to money. What is money all about? Well, it's basically to transfer value from one place to another. Now, money has 3 different properties which are essential to it. These being as a medium of exchange. So you can kind of see this with currencies, of being able to interchange between different things, of tokens. You can see this as in like a fair or a playground park, or maybe in Disney World. I don't know. I've never been there myself, where there are tokens that you can use as payment within it. Oh, I've got this many tickets. With this many tickets, I can buy a lolly or a paper airplane or something like that. We have the store of value. So something like fish, for example, rots. That's not useful as a store of value. Something like paper money, that's pretty durable. It doesn't degrade over time. Well, over a long time it does, but that one's pretty good. Gold, another example, really, really good at not being kind of breakable, or you have to really, melt it, add different things if you want to change its composition and whatnot. Sure, you can scrape off a couple of gold atoms every time you stroke your gold bar lovingly, but as a store of value, it's worked very well over time. Bitcoin is very much like this. It is going to be a store of value. You keep your money in there, and over time it will appreciate. The last one here is a unit of account. So this is being able to price things, and this is being able to say, okay, a house is, let's just say 10 Bitcoin at the moment. That's roughly 400,000 Australian. And I can have something like a chair within this house, or a backboard or a painting or a poster or something like that. I can still price that painting or poster, but it's going to be in the same unit. I don't need to use fish to price that. I can also use Bitcoin, but it's going to be obviously a much smaller amount. In the case of my poster behind me, it might be 0.004 Bitcoin, which is a much less amount than or 10 Bitcoin than I'd use to value a house. So we can very much see, okay, Bitcoin satisfies these properties, and much more things like being fungible, being divisible, durable, portable, counterfeit resistant. It's got really good properties as money. So this is going to get us all onto the value tag. So this is combining value for value, podcasting 2.0, and Bitcoin. So the value tag, what is it? And how does it work with RSS? So I'm going to go here to the GitHub for the podcast index. So this is for the podcast namespace. And this is where it's starting to describe what is the purpose of the value tag, how do you use it? So the value tag is a way to receive direct payments for podcasters to receive direct payments from their audience in response to the action of viewing or listening to a created work. Utilizing so-called layer 2 cryptocurrency networks like Lightning and possibly other digital currency mechanisms, near real-time micropayments can be directly sent from listener or viewer to the creator without the need for a payment processor or other middlemen. Once again, this is getting back into the white paper of Bitcoin. A purely peer-to-peer version of electronic cash would allow online payments to be sent directly from one party to another without going through a financial institution. We have done it. It is happening here with the value tag. So basically what this is, it's you have a Lightning address, you have some sort of address, a wallet that I was talking about just before. You put this in your source of truth, the RSS feed, and then people who are ingesting this, and this being the podcast apps, they can have a way of saying, okay, if you want to support this creator, you can choose a way to do it. And there's a couple of different ways of doing this, which I'll get onto soon. And this is how you can directly send money, in this case, in the form of Bitcoin, directly from yourself to them. If you are an American listener and you're listening to an Iranian podcast, tell me a way of you being able to get money to them. I, for example, for a podcast that I like to support in the United Kingdom, I wanted to buy one of their shirts. Sending money to them directly from my bank account to their bank account was awful, and that is between two countries which are, I'm their brethren. The convict descended from them, so there is very much this aspect of, okay, this is actually having some real utility. This is amazing. Now, one of the most powerful parts of the value tag is the splits. And so this is the ability to create not just one payment where it can go to. You can say, okay, if you're going to pay something to me or to this podcast, it can go 50% here and it can go 50% to another person. So for example, for myself and for Juan, we could do it as 50-50, but no, we do it in other ways as well by incentivizing the podcast apps and helping to support them. So actually, for every Satoshi, for every portion of Bitcoin that you send to us directly within the apps, 10% will go out to 6 different developers, 30% will go to myself, 30% will go to Juan, and 30% into a joint fund that we use to help improve the show by buying more equipment, by broadcasting this to more people, to kind of like a fund which we use for development of the show. And this is probably the most powerful thing about this, because what it can do is it's a way of incentivizing everyone in the system. Everyone gets a piece of the pie. So podcasters, obviously, app developers, so this is the people who are creating the apps where you listen to, they provide a valuable service, but they get jack shit because there is just no real payment method for them to be involved in the moving of money back and forth. Hosts, if they want to get in on this, they can do that by saying, okay, if you want to put value into your a Lightning address into your feed, that's awesome. We just ask that we'll take 2% or 5% of that, something like that. The podcast index, they have a standard 1%, which goes to them for helping to create all of this, to maintaining a database which these podcasting apps can use. You can even do this for services for stats. One is called Conchax, where you can get stats which get in 10% actually from us goes to a place called satoshis.stream, which gives us some amazing stats and allows us to see, okay, this person sent in a message, and we can get it going to our Telegram and to our Discord, and adds in so many features. Sure, amazing. A service which I willingly and gladly pay for. There are things like if you want to add collaborators in, every time that I get a guest on the show, I offer them the 30% that would normally go to Juan. I offer them that 30%, and they can choose to take that up if they want to. I could also do things like charities if I wanted to, if I had a show related to the World Wildlife Fund or something like that, and it was a podcast directly from that organization, they could have that as their kind of charity feed. And so for every Satoshi, every dollar that came in, every portion of Bitcoin, every monetary value, let's just put it that way, that could go directly to their charity. There's so many different things you can do with it. The splits is amazing. It really just aligns incentives. You can even send it back to the listeners if you want. Say you've got someone who is providing a lot of value, but it is in the form of artwork. You can put in 5%, 10%, 20% for them, whatever you want. And that can go directly from one listener to another listener who is actually helping to support the show, just not in a monetary form. It opens up so many avenues of being able to incentivize people to do things, to just everyone is kind of on the same board and everyone's getting a piece of the pie. And it's really cutting out these middlemen who, in many cases, are non-productive and who are solely there to provide trust, which I would say is kind of the best case. And in this case, I'm talking about things like PayPal, which are solely there to facilitate and provide trust that this goes from here to there. And in the worst case, they are there to restrict and control whatever it is that you're doing, whilst also charging you for the privilege of doing that. For those of you who haven't investigated the music industry, might just be worth having a quick check out of how much a individual musician gets from their royalties. It's like 10 to 20%, if that. And so all the rest of that money is going to the record companies, is going to distributors, to promoters. And a lot of this is work which has kind of just been stagnated, which is just like, this is the way it is. We're the big boys. If you want to record, if you want to put your music out, this is how you have to do it. Once again, with value for value, this can change that, but I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. That comes in the near future. So how is this actually facilitated? What is the value tag? What's some real examples of this? Well, one of this is streaming stats. So basically, I can whip up an app, one like, let's just choose Cast-O-Matic, for example, and I can choose for every minute on the minute, I want 21 Satoshis or 100 Satoshis to go. Let's use an easy example, 100 Satoshis to go to the podcaster. So that means every minute that I'm listening, it will go through to them. Now, it won't necessarily be sent every minute on the minute, because sometimes these apps like to do batching. And so they might wait for 10 minutes and then send in 10 minutes worth of you listening. But, if you finish listening at 12 minutes, they will then go, okay, I will send that extra 2 minutes in. Bam, that goes to the podcast list, the podcast host, or to whoever they have in their split in their feed. So if you do 100 sats per minute, that means every minute 100 sats will get distributed to the various splits that you have set up. So once again, for me, that would be 30% to Juan, 30% to myself, 30% to our individual fund. And then of those 6 developers, which I have in the feed split, that 1% will go to this guy, 1% here, 1% here, and 4% for here, something like that. So we can really see, okay, this is really getting into the aspect of micropayments. And unlike subscriptions or paywalls, you are only paying for what you actually use. And so this is kind of known as play to pay. And so once again, on the podcast index namespace, GitHub, and for the value tag here, this system can be thought of as play to pay rather than the traditional pay to play paywall approach. When a media listener, such as within a podcast app, presses the play button on an episode whose feed contains a value block, a compatible app will be expected to begin streaming micropayments to the designated recipients on a time interval that makes sense for the app. The amount of each payment can be any amount the listener chooses, including 0. If the listener chooses not to pay to listen to this media, then the app can ignore the value block of that feed. So we can really see, okay, once again, this is enabling so many cool things. It's enabling a listener to value their podcast at whatever amount they want. It enables the app to perhaps take a portion of this as well. And that enables you as the listener to know, okay, I'm really deciding on how much value I'm getting from this. I'm not getting overcharged. I get to choose. As soon as I stop listening, it's as soon as I stop paying. And so the cool thing about this is it's really passive. It really requires no active decision making to be made, whilst also giving flexibility in determining the amount. So I, as a listener, once again, can choose, you know what, I want to really support this amount to this particular creator. I think they're worth 100 sats per minute. This one, which I don't value as much, it's not my favorite show, but it's still okay, I'm going to send them 10 sats per minute. And you can really see just having this ability to kind of do a set and forget way of supporting your favorite creator is just a game changer. It's really, really amazing. And when it catches on, you're really going to be able to do some more cool things, such as seeing in your stats, what do listeners actually prefer listening to? When do they stop dropping off? And, okay, they only made it halfway through this show. Oh, maybe I'm doing something weird there. And you can kind of see this with the value. You can kind of see this in things like YouTube. With podcasting, you can't see this at all because the analytics mechanisms of the open source podcasting doesn't really allow for this. It's not how could I say this, surveilled enough. There's enough privacy where you as the listener, that sort of information doesn't go through all the way to the host and to the podcaster themselves. But if people are voluntarily sending you money, you can see this. It's really, really cool. Another way of doing this is via boosts and boostagrams. So this is the nomenclature. This is the naming of these things. So these are individual one-off payments that are typically larger and usually occur due to a call to action or maybe a highlight that is within the episode. So a call to action, here's one for you right now. If you're really enjoying everything that's been happening, send me a boost. Send me through, I used an example of a Bitcoin before. Send me through a Bitcoin. Now, okay, obviously most people aren't going to be sending through 38,000 or 40,000 or whatever it is at the moment. But I could just give a highlight, an example, and say, hey, if you've been enjoying it so much, send me something through, something funny, like 8,008, a boob donation. Or you can do this unprompted on your own. This can be automated for recurring amounts and for support, even if the listening is irregular. So if you're more of someone who just wants to support a show, but you're not necessarily going to be listening in to every single episode, you can do it so that you will have a boost come in, a certain amount for each episode, for each piece of content that I create. Or you could do this on a schedule, much like Dave Jones does for myself for this show, where he will send in his regular 12112, so 12,112 sats, which has a special meaning to him, every week on a Wednesday, and it's a show of support, even if he doesn't necessarily have time to tune into this actual show. We can also see this being done through another service called Oak, which allows for one-time payments, recurring one-time payments. And in the future, we'll see this through apps such as PodFans, which have this service built into it. The Boostagram, so that is a boost. A Boostagram is essentially the same thing, but with a message attached to it as well. So this can provide the show for extra content and valuable feedback. And it's kind of a way of solving the black box problem for creators and podcasters, which I referenced before. So this is where, for my first year and a half of podcasting, it really did feel like I was speaking into a void. Very little feedback would come to me, and some of it was so hard to find, I didn't even know it was there, such as someone left us a review on Apple Podcasts. I don't have a notification system that blinks up and tells me, oh, you received a new thing on Apple Podcasts. No, I would have to go to that day in and day out to see, oh, did someone do anything there? It's very much a painful process, because I remember doing this myself. I would listen to a whole bunch of podcasts and I would want to give them some feedback, say, hey, I really enjoyed listening to the show. Now, how would I typically do this? well, I couldn't do it within the podcasting app. So usually I'd have a try and see, do they have any socials? Okay, yeah, maybe they have an Instagram. All right, I'll go over to them. Oh, but it's kind of weird just sending them an unprompted message. Whatever, I'll do it anyway. Oh, that message, did that actually go through? Or are they just ignoring it? I'm not too sure because it doesn't have the read functionality. A funny little example here was I sent a podcaster a message in 2020, and they didn't respond to it until 2023. And they were just like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. This went into the non-primary section of Instagram, and I just don't check the other bit. Thank you for giving me a review and sending some feedback 2 to 3 years after the fact. So the amazing thing for this is you really are solving that problem. When you get a Boostagram in, no matter the amount, it's kind of a just direct, in your face show of support. Someone values your podcast, and it doesn't matter how much it is, really. The bigger amount, yeah, sure, that's amazing, but it's more the aspect that you can know, you can see, you can feel it. It's something tangible, which just is an absolute game changer. So Boostagrams and streaming sats are two amazing functionalities that occur from the value tag. Now, I've been talking about this for a while, but what's some case examples? And so I'm going to give you some of our stats that we've done for this show. So we received our first revenue, aka a boost, which came in of July 2021 from a supporter who doesn't tune in that much, I don't think, by the name of Chad F. And so if you're looking at your screen now, and if you can't see the graph that I'm talking about, either go onto the YouTube channel or go onto a new podcast app, newpodcastapps.com, one like Fountain, Castomatic, Curocaster, Podverse. They will be able to show these. Podfriend, they will be able to show these images within the actual app. And you can see from I've created this graph which goes from Q3 of 2021 through to Q1 of 2023, because that is the most recent. And you can see it's once again one of those kind of bar graph turning into hopefully exponential graphs where just the amounts just get larger and larger. So we first started off in our first 3 months with getting about 229,000 sats. A year later, we were sitting at 1,860,000. And then roughly another year later, we're sitting at 4 million and something. And you can really just see, okay, the numbers are starting to go up here. Now, in terms of, okay, how much actually is this? Is this better than advertising, for example? Well, we can put it this way. If you do the math, 4,363,000 sats comes out as roughly $1,500, $1.5 to $2,000 Australian, so $1.5 to $2,000. How much would we have gotten if we had done kind of the standard advertising in that time period? Well, for the amount of listens that our show gets, which is, I'd say in that time period, it was probably about 100,000 listens. You can typically get $15 to $20 cost per mil. So this is for every 1,000 times that someone listens to the show, you'll get maybe $15 to $20. If you do the math for that, once again, that's roughly equaling to that $1.5 to $2,000, which are reasonable numbers. Everything I said there was reasonable. Now, that's okay. So you could kind of say, well, that's roughly equivalent. And okay, why should I do it then? Wouldn't it just be easier to do advertising? Well, I mean, not necessarily. I would argue that my show is better because we've never taken advertising money for it. So I can avoid all the censorship issues that I talked about before. I'd never had to do any meetings with advertisers or sponsors about, agreements on this, on how we can do the host read, or talking about this product, or, you need to say it this way, or say it more with more passion, or remember to make sure you say the code at the end. And there's a lot of hassle that can go into all of that as well. And I think of the downside of advertising and sponsorship. There's some other things which you could maybe call downsides. You do have to constantly remind your audience. You do have to ask. When you first start off, it kind of feels like begging, like, please send me some support. But no, when you get into the meat of it, it goes, I'm providing a show, I'm providing value for you. I just ask that you provide it back. That's all I'm asking for. So with our show, you can kind of see, okay, it's starting to make some sense. And I'm going to continue doing this. And this is not a big show. I started off from scratch. I wasn't a famous person before I started, and I hopefully never will be famous. So that doesn't sound fun. But I do think I can get it to a level where I will be able to form a lifestyle, to have an income generated from the podcast, from people supporting into me. And if I find that kind of 1,000 true fans, which is a very famous blog post by Kevin Kelly, which is this aspect of, if you get 1,000 people who are willing to support you in a monetary form, that's kind of all you need. You don't need to be a famous megastar. You don't need to be getting millions and millions of downloads per episode. You can survive on a much, much less than that. Now, Adam Curry is another classic example, and for his stats, it's hard to measure because I don't listen to his show that often, but they have segments in their show where they just thank everyone for who's supporting them. And because they were getting so much, they had to put caps on it of, if it's less than kind of $150, we don't have time. The show will just go so long. And so they have people sending in $300, $400 regularly. And then every now and then, 5,000, thousands and thousands. So it's definitely doable to create it to a level, to get it to a level where you are able to sustain not just one family or but two family, and to do it in a way where you don't need to have a full network. You don't need to be this crazy big celebrity or popular or something like that. No, you can have your niche and you can make it for yourself. Now, another case example here is just showing that people are actually using this. Everything that I talked about now is, look, it's kind of nerdy. I get it. Talking about RSS feeds, talking about audio, talking about all these different things. Why do I care, Karen? Well, it is the way of the future. That is kind of like the nerds determine where things go. And it's, if you're on that boundary point between nerdy or normal, then it might be worth exploring some of these things. And what I can tell you is that it is gaining adoption. So the other graph that you'll see on your screen was showing the V for V stats. And now these are come from the actual podcast index itself, because they ask for a 1% payment of everything that goes through, a 1% fee. They actually get quite a good bit of data. Okay, what's actually going on? How much is actually roughly flowing through the system? Now, not everyone gets this. So just taking from their website, which is stats.podcastindex.org/V for V. This is a look at the total sats flowing through the value for value Lightning podcasting economy over various periods of time. We calculate this data based on our visibility as a 1% voluntary split on podcastindex.org API calls. Therefore, the true numbers could be higher, but they cannot be lower than listed here. This represents our best approximation of how many sats are flowing across the entire ecosystem, from listeners to creators, guests via episode splits, platforms, services, and apps. So it's really showing, okay, what's going on? Where is all of this stuff going? So I'll just read from the 90-day period that they have here. In the last 90 days, 110,807,468 sats, which is equaling to about 30 grand. I'm guessing that's USD, has been flowing through the system. So that's more than a full Bitcoin. The transaction count, there's been about 1 million transactions, and unique senders is roughly hovering about 300 to 400 per day. So once again, I would say in the terms of the full numbers, is this millions? Is this billions of dollars? No, not yet. It's still relatively small. But what I can say is, once again, this is getting distributed across a variety of places. At the moment, there's about 13,000 podcasts which have this enabled. Now, are every single 13,000 of them getting an equal split of that? Absolutely no way, because many of them have enabled it, but they don't talk about it. They don't ask for value back from their audience. Unless people know about the service, what you're operating, what you're asking for, how to do it, they're not going to do it. And so even though you can maybe say, oh, that's not that much, in the last couple of months, we have received, so in this 90-day period, I would say we as the mere mortals, we probably got about 2 million of that. So that is definitely more than our kind of fair share. But it's because we follow the system and we ask for value back, and we make it obvious as to how our supporters can help support via this way. Now, effort and patience definitely does get rewarded. So even though the numbers are small, they're growing. And when I first started off this in, when was it, 2021, there was 400 podcasts which had value enabled. That's up to 13,000 now. And you can see over time, the graph of that also shows, okay, this is regularly gaining adoption. People are becoming interested in this, and it's not slowing down. It's not going downwards. More and more people are getting interested. Of these 13,000, about 3/4 of these are 3Speak feeds, which are an interesting little side project here, and which is getting more, I suppose, onto the room for more. What's going to come in the future? What are some other cool things? How are individuals able to make this, make a big difference just on their own? And there's this thing called PodPing and HIVE. So one of the things about podcasting 2.0 is that everyone is welcome to participate for value, and for Bitcoin, actually, everyone is able to participate. This is the permissionless. Everyone can get at it. And it's important to remember that value is subjective. And this is one of the things I kind of hear, value for value. It's a Bitcoin thing. You can send Bitcoin. Yeah, sure, you can. But you can also send other things. It's value for value is subjective. And so there's these two things which have been created, one called PodPing, which is a notification system that can reduce the amount of energy required for scraping feeds just to check if they have changed. So typically the way that something like Apple or Spotify will check to see if new podcasts have been updated, is there a new episode, have they changed their artwork, did they change the description in one of their shows, is they just scrape. They are just clawing at every single feed, at every single podcast host, every half an hour, give me that data, and this requires a ton of energy to do. Wouldn't it make more sense if the podcast hosts or the people who own the feed just send out a message every time that they change something, and then that would allow Apple to know, oh, get a new version of their feed. And so they're not wasting all of this energy checking for things that actually haven't changed. Well, this is what PodPing does. PodPing is a way for the podcast host to send out a message, and then this is written on the HIVE blockchain, which is very much suited for this sort of stuff. I won't get into all the details, but it's very cool where something which is a kind of niche, hard to fix problem was solved by really kind of one guy proposing it and then a couple of people getting into it. And so this was a guy by the name of Brian of London. And he has also done some other cool things like the Hive to Lightning Bridge. So this blockchain, the Hive blockchain, they have their own version of currency on it. And if you are listening to one of their feeds, so I've mentioned the 3Speak before. So this is basically a video podcast, which is something that they use on this blockchain. People create these video podcasts. If you go into an app and you're listening via Lightning, via Bitcoin, he's created a way where as you are listening, it can automatically convert this and turn it into Hive. So something that these people on this platform value more than Satoshis. So there's this really cool stuff where it's just kind of everyone's working together, and there's just no restrictions. If you've got your own sort of thing and you're willing to put in a bit of work and effort to try and create something new, the value tag, for example, it's not only Lightning. You can use whatever cryptocurrency you want in there if you're willing to put in the time to do the hard development that's required. If there are other people out there who will create apps that will support this, it's kind of the very definition of the free and open market. Everyone can do what they want, and it's through the interaction of everyone doing what they want that we find out what actually is valuable, what do actually a lot of people want and need. And this is then finally getting us into what else is in the future. I've been only talking about podcasting here, but digital content comes in many forms. It can come in music, can come in writing, can come in video. And RSS supports all of these. You can have a blog, you can put music in an audio file, and you can put video in. And though they might not be podcasts, they're definitely digital content. This is commonly associated with audio, but RSS, which stands for Really Simple Syndication, is a simple but also powerful tool. So commonly just for the MP3 of kind of people talking, but why can't you do it for music? And well, the thing is you can. And so there was a band called Abel and the Wolf, which was comprised of two podcasters, and they decided, hey, we want to actually create some music using this new system and see, is this actually better than perhaps something like Spotify, where you as the artist, as the creator, you get so little. For every 1,000 listens that someone is on there, you'll get maybe, I think it's 1 cent or 2 cents. It's an absurdly small amount. If you compare this to roughly what we've seen, which is very similar to the amount of money that you can get via advertising. So it was roughly around that $15 to $20 per 1,000. They actually experienced something similar. So they put their music up in an RSS feed. They put chapter images, which is kind of like what you would see for the episode artwork or the band, the cover art that you would typically see on a CD back when those were a thing. And they were able to do this, and there was just a need for it, a drive for it. People enjoyed listening to music, and whilst it's kind of the functionality is not great at the moment because you have to use a podcast app, and it's better to use a music app, much like YouTube Music, much like kind of Spotify used to be before it added podcasts. There's ways where this is becoming more and more valuable. Another thing I haven't talked about was the value time split. So this is being able to say directly within an episode, I want it to change from my normal split between myself, Juan, and the developers. I'd like that to go to somewhere else. And this then allows for so much more functionality, like being a DJ, having a DJ set, welcome, talking about the latest, greatest hits. There's a new one I found. Play the song, and as the song's playing, all the splits, everything changes, and the money goes towards the artist. And then when the DJ comes back in, it goes back to him. We're going to see, hopefully, Adam Curry doing this, recreating his old MTV days. And it could be it's almost like a revival of radio and DJs. We might see this happening within what is, I suppose, commonly the podcasting world. We can see this happening with writing, with how there are things like Nostr, which is it's a protocol basically where it's kind of, imagine Twitter, but as you're writing, people can send you, instead of a like, which is just a kind of meaningless heart, there's actually 10 sats, a very, very micro payment, a portion of Bitcoin, which goes to you. Things like Stacker News, Blue Sky. There's also this idea of being able to write, and people, as they're reading, as they get past a certain paragraph, a payment might go or something like that. We can also see this with video happening with PeerTube. I mentioned all the three speak feeds before. Those are all video. And even something like YouTube, which you might not think, I was kind of railing on them a bit before, but they've developed something similar, which is super chats, of being able to support the creator, of being able to send them a message as you support them. And so it shows up on their screen and they can thank you directly. I see this with Twitch as well. There's a hunger, there's a desire. The trend is going towards supporting people in a more peer-to-peer manner. And therefore, having a digital money that is programmable, i.e. Bitcoin, makes sense because you can do so many cool things with it. You can create splits. You can tell it when to stop and turn on, and you can do recurring payments, and you can do small payments which don't make sense in the current financial system. There's no way you can send anything less than $1 or $2 anywhere else because it all just gets chewed up in the charges that things like PayPal will ask for. So all of that kind of makes sense in this digital programmable money way. All right, that was a whole lot of stuff. So let's get into my summary. podcasting. Podcasting is finally improving. There's new features, there's new functionalities, and it provides a better listening experience. And dare I even say a new listening experience. Podcasting 2.0 is offering so much in terms of benefit for the listeners, but then benefits also for the people creating it, of creating a connectivity between the two of us. As a listener, they can now, or I can now, decide how I want to listen, how to give value back, and if I choose to do that in a monetary form, in a way that makes the most sense. Doing it within the app actually makes sense. It makes sense to just cut out all of these middlemen, to cut out so much bullshit of Apple scraping feeds, of wasted energy, of getting out of the app, of trying to go into Instagram or somewhere else to try and find the link to do this. Everything is making sense in terms of efficiency, in terms of energy, in terms of being able to connect. It's so much better. Now, beyond all of the boring kind of money stuff, so I was giving you stats then of how much I've made, of how you can make this, of how you can get more or less, or all of these sorts of things. The most important thing that all of this has enabled, and in particular that Bitcoin has enabled, is helped me to connect more with others in a direct manner, in a way that I haven't experienced before, and also allows me to behave more ethically and truthfully. There was a period where I kind of had reached the boundary point of what I wanted to do with the podcast. If I grew it anymore, I needed to be compensated for that, because I'm spending a whole lot of time, energy, and effort creating all of these things. And to do that long term, I would need to receive some sort of monetary payment for that. How was I going to do that? I've always had an aversion to advertising, to sponsorships, and this has enabled me to do it in a way which I do believe is more ethical. I do believe it's more truthful, and it's solving so many of those problems of the black box, of feeling alone, of not having this support, knowing that someone actually cares, that you're creating something, that it is valuable to them. All of that eclipses any monetary amount that I've actually received. So that's kind of my summary of podcasting 2.0, of value for value, and how these are delivering on the promise of Bitcoin, of enabling peer-to-peer transactions between two willing participants. Amazing. So let's just get on to my final section here, is my value ask, my call to action. Well, I would just recommend checking out the 3 podcasts that I've kind of create and participate in. Almost every individual I've listed in this episode has appeared on the Mere Mortals. So Adam Curry, Dave Jones, Brian of London, Chris Fisher, James Cridland, and I can't remember if I listed some more people. Perhaps almost all of them have appeared on here. And so if you want more information, I would just recommend checking out some of the back catalog and learning more about the individual nuances and their portion and their part in creating all of this. I would also just say I have created the Value for Value podcast. I've created 2 seasons of that so far, and it really does dive into the nuances. I have not done Value for Value the justice it deserves here, but I've tried to. And season 3, I'm going to be basing upon this episode. So all of these individual kind of chapters that I've created from this, I'll be explaining in more depth. I'll be explaining more of the nuances and more of the history and the backstory, and how you can participate either as a listener or as a content creator yourself. And then finally, there's the Mere Mortals book reviews. And so things like the Bitcoin Standard, which was where I was talking about the definitions of money, of common as air, as another book review I did, which will help you learn more about kind of the open source IP protection and things like that. If you want a lot of the ideas and what's kind of driven me to appreciating Bitcoin, to appreciating value for value in podcasting, I would recommend checking that out as well. And then if you feel like a cheeky boost right at the end here, that is the lifeblood of this show. It is the way that it keeps me going, to be honest. If I wasn't getting boosts and Boostagrams in, I wouldn't be continuing this on. So I really do appreciate that. Meremortalspodcast.com is where you can find links to all of those things. And if you go to the support page, you'll see the graphs. You will see how you can participate in the becoming a Mere Mortalite and receiving some swag if you reach a certain level, a Mere Mortals t-shirt, all sorts of different things you can do there. So I really hope you enjoy today. Long rant, but I really enjoyed it. And it was something that's just been on my mind for 2 to 3 years. So I'm glad I finally was able to get all this out into the open. Thank you so much for joining all the way to the end here. And I really do hope you enjoy. And yeah, look forward to interacting and creating more connections with you, my dear listeners. That is it for now. Ciao for now. Kyron out.